Have you ever noticed something? Whenever people talk about China, they usually describe it as one giant machine. One person in Beijing makes a decision and somehow more than 1 billion people immediately follow it. Every business is controlled. Every city is controlled. Everything is planned from the top. That's the image a lot of us have. But what if that picture isn't actually true? What if China works very differently from what most people imagine? And according to economist Keyu Jin, that's exactly the mistake many people make.
Well, the first is that most people think that China is an extremely centralized system, which it is, but the more accurate way to describe it is an extreme form of political concentration, but an equally extreme form of economic decentralization. Going back 30 years, all of the major reforms were implemented by the local governments to all the way to today. The EVs that we're seeing, the mini Silicon Valleys all over China, the solar panels, the new technology, emerging strategic technologies, the local governments really had a hand in that, whether it was helping them build and coordinate supply chains to helping them attract talent, really being a one-stop shop that helped many of these companies overcome these barriers. Local governments were really crucial. So this is why in the book, I have a chapter called The Mayor Economy, which I think, very few people really understood deeply how it worked, why were the local governments really incentivized to do that, right? As we're speaking, I talking to quite a few local governments, and they're helping even clean up the mess in the economy, even negotiate between lenders and creditors. They really do so much, and they do so much for the private companies. That leads to the second misconception, which is somehow the state suppresses the private. Is an ongoing theme, whether it's the companies or the people, and I like to come back to that. But it's really quite the opposite. I mean, sure, you have instances and anecdotes everywhere of unfair ways, but by and large, the local governments are very incentivized to help out productive companies. Why? Because they earn them quite a bit of they provide benefits for the local governments in the sense they bring in investment, they create jobs. If you are a national champion, that makes the governments look very good. To give you an example, a semiconductor company recently, did some breakthroughs, and the Beijing government gave them substantial support, and they said, "Look, we want a Beijing champion." They didn't say we want a Chinese champion coming out of this. We want a Beijing champion. So that's an example where you see all these local governments almost bending their back forward to help these private companies. And again, this is not just one or two, Beijing, Shanghai, it's really everywhere. Some of the major technology companies come from cities your audience probably have never heard of. Hefei, for instance, has come up with the best quantum companies, and the EV company is NEO, and their headquarters is there. So that there is a big drive to help the private companies, which is a deep misunderstanding as well. And lastly, I'd say that, again, I really want to focus on the theme between the people and the state, because I think there are many other misunderstandings, but this really runs deep. Part of the reason writing this book is that, basically in macroeconomics at Harvard, you're taught three models in macroeconomics, right? Very limited role for the state. State intervention only comes in when there are market failures. Well, I think we need to revise some of the models. There's not only just one model that works, and especially in the beginning, whether it's the beginning stages of development or when you're starting a new industry. Think about the emerging industries, EVs, batteries, solar, these new industries. The big state push is important. And I think the recent years have demonstrated how really important it could be and how critical and pivotal it could be. For instance, EVs. It helps that the Chinese government has rolled out 4 million EV charging stations within a very short period of time. It helps that 80 cities were actually building EVs. That leads to other sorts of problems, but you see that initial push of mobilization, of state coordination is quite important, but we tended to have continuously dismiss that. So the state and the people, also the same thing, right? It's not just authoritarianism if we're looking from the purely Western lens, but there's kind of an implicit contract between the people and authority, between people and their parents, children and teachers, the same level of respect, not blind submission, but in exchange, for stability, for prosperity, citizens should behave a certain way, but they really demand and expect governments to do some things, and they hold them accountable. And in fact, the Chinese government has been quite responsive, arguably more responsive than many, many other governments in handling major crises or undertaking serious responsibilities.
One of the biggest misunderstandings most people have about China is that everything is controlled by Beijing. Politically, yes, China is highly centralized. But when it comes to economy, it's actually much more decentralized than most people think. Think of China less like one giant company and more like dozens of cities competing against each other. Every mayor wants their city to grow faster than everyone else. Why? Because if their local economy does well, their own career does well too. So instead of sitting around waiting for Beijing to give orders, local governments are constantly trying to attract businesses. They build roads, they improve infrastructure, they speed up approvals. They make it easier for companies to invest because everyone wants the next big success story to happen in their own city. Take electric vehicles as an example. When EV started taking off, cities across China rushed to build charging stations and attract EV companies. At one point, more than 80 cities were trying to build their own EV brands. That's not really what most people imagine when they hear the word centrally planned economy. It's more like dozens of cities competing with each other every single day. Another thing many people get wrong is the relationship between the government and private businesses. If you only watch the news, you probably think Chinese government wants to control every private company. But the reality is much more complicated. Private companies make up the vast majority of China's manufacturing exports. They are the ones creating jobs. They are the ones building products. They are the ones driving much of China's economic growth. And local governments know this. If a startup shows real potential, local officials often do everything they can to help it grow. Why? Because successful companies create jobs, bring in tax revenue, and make the local government look good. So every city wants to produce the next Huawei, the next BYD, or the next big success story. So in many cases, local governments are actually competing to support businesses, not trying to shut them down. And then there's one more thing that's often misunderstood. Many people assume ordinary Chinese people must all be unhappy or living in fear. Of course, China has problems. Every country does. But try looking at it from their point of view. Imagine growing up in a poor village with no modern roads, no high-speed rail, and very few opportunities. Then, within one generation, your country becomes one of the world's largest economies. Your children have better schools, better hospitals, modern cities, and opportunities your parents could never have imagined. Now, if your life improved that much, you'd probably feel pretty positive about your country's direction too, right? For many Chinese people, that's exactly what happened. So instead of asking whether the system matches a particular political model, many people simply ask, is my life getting better? Can I find a good job? Can I support my family? If the answer is yes, then many people feel the system is doing what it's supposed to do. That's why China often confuses outsiders. It doesn't fit neatly into the boxes we are familiar with. It's not a completely free market capitalist country, but it's also not the old-style communist economy that many people imagine. It's something much more unique. Whether you agree with China's system or not is a separate question. But if we want to understand China's rise, we first have to understand how it actually works, not how we assume it works. So, what do you think? Has the West misunderstood how China actually works? Or do you see it differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more interesting videos just like this one. Thank you for watching.